Are we doing the millennial pause? Does this count as a millennial pause?
Today's subject.
So I read the Dunk and Egg Tales, and then I listened to the audiobook because I needed another go, because I found them boring.
Boom, boom, boom.
Now I know what you're gonna say. How can they be boring? They're so cute. Look at them. I know. I really wanted to like it. That's why I gave it a second chance.
Huge consequence.
So we're going to talk about that chance today because I found out some things about Dunk that made me change my mind about him. Is he boring? Can I forgive that he didn't go back and buy Sweetfoot even though he promised her that he would? Is Dunk even important in the A Song of Ice and Fire universe? And does his story tell us anything about how our current knight's story will end? And is character construction important at all? If that sounds interesting, please stick around. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is coming out, so I wanted to make a video about it before I get influenced on the actor who plays Dunk, because if he plays him differently than how he is in the book, then Look, I'm going to give it a chance, okay? It looks cute. I know I can be critical. Sorry about my last video. I read quite a few different resources for today's video. They will be linked below in the description as always. We're going to be diving into Dunk in a few different ways. There's a lot of different ways to analyze and break down a character, from their archetype, moral alignment, dimension, if they're static or dynamic, if they're round or flat. There's a lot of different ways. So we're going to go through each way and categorize and break down Dunk. Let's start with his archetype. This is very obvious. He's a knight, he should be a hero. Even in the universe, knights pray to the warrior, which are heroes. But I didn't want to just assume and just go along with it. I wanted to find a way to mathematically prove that Dunk is a hero. So I read this study. While you guys listen, I'm gonna walk the dogs. I read a paper by Matthew Barry and Stephen Brown, who are in the Department of Psychology, Neuroscience, and Behavior at McMaster University. Their paper is a classification scheme for literary characters. The paper talks about the limitations of the Thomas Tillman conflict treatment, aka the TK scheme. Barry and Brown proposed a modification to that to create a more robust and comprehensive categorization method of literary characters, as there is no established method within literary theory to classify the characters around which narratives develop. Before we dig into what they added, let me explain the TK scheme first. The TK scheme classifies personality along two orthogonal dimensions of assertiveness and cooperativeness. Let's define these terms. Assertiveness is being self-assured without being agreeable in their relations. Cooperativeness is being agreeable in their relations. Barry and Brown said, this would look like a 3x2 chart with assertiveness and cooperativeness being the two axes. So what they did, they added a key modification to the structure of the scheme by adding a third neutral level to the middle of the cooperative axis, so to make this a fully 3x3 scheme. In order to prove their addition, they had 140 participants answer a survey about 40 different types of characters. They had participants rank characters on assertiveness, cooperativeness, extroversion, and conscientiousness. They did this based on reasons linked in the paper, so you can go ahead and read that. Let's define some other terms. Extroversion, level of outgoingness. Conscientiousness, being efficient and organized. They found the following: type of character and the mean and standard deviation of the mean for each measure. That means that these are the average scores for each character. We don't need to focus on all these types of characters. We're only interested in one type of character, the hero. These are the average ratings. They're out of 10, low being 1 and high being 10. For a hero, assertiveness is 7.91, which rounds to an 8. Cooperativeness, 7.83, rounds to an 8. Extroversion, 7.8, rounds to an 8. Conscientiousness, 7.13, rounds to a 7. So let's rate Dunk. My rankings are assertiveness, 9. Cooperativeness, 9. Extroversion, 8. Conscientiousness, 5. I rated Dunk's assertiveness as 9 as he puts his beliefs into action. I'm focusing on protection. He jumps in and protects the weak. He looks out for the peasants. For example, instead of forcing Osgrey's peasants to fight for Osgrey, he tells them to flee. I rated Dunk's cooperativeness a 9 because he works well with others. I'm thinking of upholding his lord's law. For example, he defends Osgrey's honor against Lady Rohan's knight, even though he doesn't like that Osgrey back to Blackfire. Question. Do we like the Blackfires? Let me know in the comments. As a community, do we stan them? Do we not stan them? I'm not really sure. I rated Dunk's extroversion as 8, as he does take the lead. For example, he takes Egg to be his squire. He chooses to join in tournaments. He's not an introvert. And finally, I ranked Dunk's conscientiousness as a 5, as he is not efficient with solutions. He defaults to brute force. He tends to fight his way out when he should take a beat and consider his options more often than he does. For example, he jumps in to protect Tanzel, but doesn't consider that he just attacked a prince and will face dire consequences because of it. Now you might be thinking, whoa, your ratings are different than the averages the study found. And that's okay, because of the standard deviation. Taking that into consideration, we're all groovy.
That's my opinion!
Dunk falls in the same space that Barry and Brown's hero character type does. Okay, we're done on the walk. This means that I verified Dunk's archetype, at least according to this study. Now that we know he's a hero, let's take that understanding as we go on to the next methods of analyzing him. And all of these things relate to each other. His alignment can limit his dimension. Whether he's dynamic or static can limit both his dimension and alignment. And if he's a round or flat character, they all go hand in hand. Let's start with moral alignment. Moral alignment. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this concept. Are you good or bad? Are you neutral? Do you follow the law? Do you like chaos? The easiest way to talk about this is through D&D. Brennan Lee Mulligan talked about using alignment in D&D in a Wired interview. He said that alignment is an element of tracking player character ideals. Zib Stricky, look, I don't know how to say his name. This guy just has a website over moral alignment in D&D. He didn't put his name anywhere. I just know that based on the contact me email that he linked. So I'm just gonna call it the website, all right? He says, a good creature's general moral and personal attitudes are represented by its alignment. Lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good, lawful neutral, neutral, chaotic neutral, lawful evil, neutral evil, and chaotic evil. I saw this alignment chart on Reddit, and it's just a copy-paste of what this guy said on his website, but I really liked the characters that they put as examples. Go ahead and pause to read this, as it would take a few minutes to go through each one. The important part is that we're dealing with the two axes, lawful to chaotic and good to evil. Let's focus on the ones that I think apply to Dunk. First, lawful versus chaotic. Based on these descriptions, I went straight to lawful. This is because Dunk follows both his Knight's Oath and the Code of Chivalry. From both a Song of Ice and Fire wiki and the Game of Thrones wiki, when a knight is knighted, they are given the following oath to follow. In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave. In the name of the father, I charge you to be just. In the name of the mother, I charge you to defend the young and innocent. In the name of the maid, I charge you to protect all women. In the Hedge Knight, Dunk defends himself and his knighthood. He is talking about who witnessed him become a knight. Only a robin up in a thorn tree. I heard it as the old man was saying the words. He charged me to be a good knight and true, to obey the 7 gods, defend the weak and innocent, serve my lord faithfully, and defend the realm with all my might. And I swore that I would. Knights also have a code to live by, the Code of Chivalry. The Code of Chivalry is, be brave and just, defend the young and innocent, especially women who cannot defend themselves. Be cleanly as well as godly. Act with military courtesy in combat when nobles and knights are taken prisoner. Their lives are spared and are often held for ransom. John Connington who? Dunk says in The Sworn Sword, I was born of gutter blood. A hedge knight named Sir Arlen of Pennytree took me on to squire for him when I was just a boy. He taught me chivalry and the arts of war. Dunk believes in his code and upholds it no matter the situation he's in. You see this with Tenzel in The Hedge Knight. He attacks a prince of the realm to protect her. You see this with Osgray in The Sworn Sword. He defends his lord regardless of his lord's allegiance to the Blackfyres. You see this with Sir Glendon Ball in The Mystery Knight. In every case, Dunk relies on his knight's oath. That's why I put him on the lawful axis. Now let's look at good and evil. This is where I'm having a hard time. Not because I think Dunk is evil, but I'm having a hard time between good and neutral. Now you might say, well, Dunk's a knight, and knights are heroes, and aren't heroes good? And I know, I would agree. Except, if we're looking at knights, you can't just assume all knights are good. Even if they are good, I don't think the knight's oath really extends beyond just being acceptable. Because, okay, let's take a beat. Misogyny. I know. When we're talking about misogyny in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, you're going to say, well, it's the sign of the times. It's based on medieval stuff. No. It doesn't. That doesn't matter because it still happens. Back to the Knight's Oath. The Knight's Oath says that you should protect all women. What it doesn't say is that you shouldn't objectify them, which, Dunk does, which is where the whole good and neutral thing comes in. So I can't decide on it. So let's look at a different resource. Remember that website that I mentioned? The owner goes into detail about alignment tendencies, and whether or not alignments are real. In fact, his deep discussion on it is really interesting. So go ahead and click on the link in the description and you can go read it for yourself. So I've narrowed Dunk down to good and neutral. This is what he says about good and neutral characters. Good characters and creatures protect innocent life. Good implies altruism, respect for life, and a concern for the dignity of sentient beings. Good characters make personal sacrifices to help others. Neutral characters have compunctions against killing the innocent, but lack the commitment to make sacrifices to protect or help others. Neutral people are committed to others by personal relationships. We could argue that Dunk, because he's a knight, is just expected to help others, and that's why he does. He vows to protect the innocent, but could he just be protecting Tenzel because of his interest in her? So let's take a quiz to find out what his alignment is for sure. I took the 140 question quiz as Dunk, and I got lawful good. Here's the clip of all my answers so you can pause and see each answer, but just believe I got lawful good. It is a very long quiz, and I don't want to read every single question to y'all. The first method is done. Dunk is lawful good. At least according to this one website. But I think my argument stands. Moving on to our next method, we're going to be talking about round versus flat. And before I answer if he is round or flat, we're going to go through the next methods too, if he's dynamic or static and what dimension he is, because they all relate to each other, and I don't want you guys getting upset as I go through it. Just bear with me and I will explain at the very end. This method, I didn't know beforehand. It came up through my research on analyzing characters, and I found this book, which is just a collection of this guy's lectures, E.M. Forster's. It is called Aspects of the Novel. This is what he says. We may divide characters into flat and round. Flat characters were called humors in the 17th century and are sometimes called types and sometimes caricatures. In their purest form, they are constructed around a single idea or quality. When there is more than one factor in them, we get the beginning of the curve towards round. One advantage of a flat character is that they are easily remembered by the reader afterwards. They remain in his mind as unalterable, for the reason that they were not changed by circumstances they moved through, which gives them, in retrospect, a comforting quality and preserves them when the book that produced them may decay. Round characters, however, cannot be summed up in a single phrase, and we remember their connection with the great scenes through which she passed and as modified by those scenes. That is to say, we do not remember her so easily because she waxes and wanes and has facets like a human being. Is Dunk a round or a flat character? They each play an important role in fiction, and one or the other is not more important. It doesn't make him better or worse. This is just what kind of character he is. A round character is nuanced, complex, contradictory. A round character is any characters whose depth and complexities are apparent throughout the story, and they must have most of the following: eternal conflict, internal conflict, desires and motives, contradictions, speech patterns, backstory, relatable traits, and fatal flaws. Homarsha, remember? Let's go through an example. My favorite girl is an example of a round character, Daenerys Targaryen. She starts off as an exiled royal to a slave to a queen. She grows and becomes a leader. She uses her experience as a slave to fuel her journey to ruling. Her personal growth drives her story. Any type of character can be round. Protagonist, antagonist, supporting. Now let's talk about a flat character. A flat character lacks nuance, straightforward, and their purpose in a story is usually perfunctory. And that is not to say that the character lacks depth entirely, only that their depth is not crucial to the story. They fulfill a specific role and often an archetype for the purpose of advancing the plot. Flat characters typically have most of the following: understandable, predictable, easy to summarize, plot-driven, built on tropes and archetypes, flawless, or at least flaws that are not worth exploring. An example of a flat character is Sherlock Holmes. Who he is not the story, it is the mysteries he solves. His personal growth does not drive the story, the plot does. Interestingly, while flat characters are mostly supporting, they can be protagonists. Round or flat does not typically limit your character's design. And before we label Dunk as round or flat, let's talk about him being dynamic or static. This is related to roundness, and you will see in a moment. Dynamic versus static. A dynamic character is a character who undergoes significant internal change throughout the course of the story. The development of a dynamic character is often subtle and unstated, and is not due to a change in the character's circumstances. A dynamic character is one who learns a lesson or changes as a person. An example of a dynamic character is Anakin Skywalker. We are with him through his fall from a hero to a dark lord. We see him learn lessons through harsh consequences. His actions change the story. However, not all round characters are dynamic. An example of a static round character is Albus Dumbledore. We know his story, his desires, flaws, but he does not personally change in the Harry Potter series. He stays a flawed mentor to Harry. Now, a static character is a type of character who remains largely the same throughout the course of the storyline. Their environment may change, but they retain the same personality and outlook as they had at the beginning of the story. So an example of a static character is Captain Hook. Captain Hook is our antagonist, yes. He's a foil to Peter Pan. But from beginning to end, he stays the same. He suffers consequences, but does not change from them. The story is not dependent on him. But not all flat characters are static. An example of a dynamic flat character is Ginny Weasley. We're talking about book Ginny. The movie Ginny is completely different. Now, we don't often have access to her complexity, and when she does primarily exist, she is Harry's eventual love interest. But she does change. She changes from a shy to a popular Quidditch player. She becomes assertive and knows what she wants. This change is independent of the story's conflict. Harry and Voldemort's conflict has nothing to do with Ginny. She just grows up. So thus far, Dunk is okay, I'm not going to get into it. We'll go to the next section. Let's talk about dimension. Dimension, yes, this is the inspiration for the video title. A character's dimension tells us about the character's depth. The depth tells us about their actions, motives, and personality. How deep a character also tells us their purpose in the story. There are 3 different dimensions, appropriately labeled 1, 2, and 3. While there are some limits on the dimension of a character based on their alignment, all characters fall under one of the 3 dimensions. Okay, as we go through each dimension, there are 3 concepts that are important: generalized characteristics, distinct traits, and specific conflicts. First, generalized characteristics are the simple description of a character. Think of an archetype. They embody a role like hero or villain, and they're normally there just to drive the plot. Distinct traits are about the specific character. Think of their likes, dislikes, fears, dreams, goals. Specific conflicts. This refers to the character's point of focus in the story. One-dimensional characters. One-dimensional characters just have generalized characteristics. They are flat characters and do not change in the story. One-dimensional characters can have any alignment, and here's where we think of plain archetypes. Two-dimensional characters. Two-dimensional characters. Pay special attention to this one. Spoiler. Two-dimensional characters have generalized characteristics and distinct traits. These characters can be described in more detail and have personality. Two-dimensional characters are written for a specific purpose. These characters may not be fully developed, or their character arc is ongoing, aka the story isn't finished. Two-dimensional characters are all flat, but are not limited to supporting characters. Protagonists can also be two-dimensional. Finally, three-dimensional characters. Three-dimensional characters have generalized characteristics, distinct traits, and specific conflicts. These characters' conflicts are a major part of the story. Their strengths and weaknesses are crafted in a realistic way that are based on their personality and motives. These characters are fully developed and are considered complex. Three-dimensional characters cannot be flat or static characters. How does this all apply to Dunk? In my honest, humble opinion, Dunk is a two-dimensional, static, flat character. Now, I know what you're saying. That doesn't mean he's bad. That doesn't mean a round character is better than a flat character, okay? These are all just neutral terms. It is what it is. And that doesn't make Dunk any less important and any less interesting. And I will note that this analysis doesn't take into account any future books that George will write about him, because remember, flat characters, static characters, sometimes they're not well developed because their story is still ongoing. That's why I labeled him the way I did. But let's think about it. Dunk has an archetype, and he doesn't deviate from that archetype. He's a hero. We can predict exactly what he'll do in most situations. He always falls back on being a knight. He repeatedly justifies his actions based on his oath, and he holds other knights to the same standard. Dunk is dependable, he's steadfast, and he will always do the right thing. The A Song of Ice and Fire wiki also labels Dunk as a true knight. In universe, true knights are rare. In each book, the Hedge Knight, the Sworn Sword, and the Mystery Knight, the characters are constantly surprised that Dunk is acting like a knight. It's almost like they don't expect them to keep their vows. But Dunk fits so perfectly with the hero archetype. He is the Superman. He is Captain America. But this doesn't mean he's boring. At first, I know, I thought so. However, after all this research and rereading the books, that's not the case. It's actually really important Dunk is a two-dimensional static flat character. Dunk, of course, is important to his own story, but he's important to the entire A Song of Ice and Fire universe. In his own story, his predictability affects those around him, especially Egg. While Dunk is ever the same, Egg is not. Through Dunk, Egg is learning how to be a whole person. Egg sees a living and breathing example of what being good truly is. Egg, once safely in the Red Keep, is plucked and put into Flea Bottom. He's amongst the common folk and is forced to challenge his own ideas about them. And he's only able to do this through and with Dunk. He's given the opportunity to confront these things that have been told to him as truths since he was a baby. Well, I guess he still is a baby, but you know what I mean. One example is when Egg is talking about bath. Now, he's going on about if you are, these are the types of qualities you have. Essentially, you're a horrible person and you can't ever change that. And Dunk, instead of yelling at Egg, just simply asks him, well, what about me? And Egg at first is just like, well, how could you be? I follow you. You're a good person. How could you be a bad? Dunk is like, well, maybe we don't know. I don't know. And instead of continuing to fight back, Egg is forced to confront that internally, and he just stops talking. And I think the gears start turning. He is starting to see that people are more than just their stereotypes, especially stereotypes that just aren't true. Another example is that Dunk doesn't let Egg just use his boot, his family's name, to get out of problems. They very could easily get shelter, food, better treatment if people just knew who Egg was. But Dunk just doesn't let him take the easy road out. Dunk teaches Egg to do it himself. And that's how you shape a future king. I also think Dunk's predictability and his true knightness actually predicts how our current knights of the story will be, what their stories will end up like. Dunk gives us the ideal to compare to. Think of Brienne, think of Jaime. How do they compare? Are they good? Are they neutral? Do they follow their oaths? Do they not? I think the Dunk effect hits Brienne hard because I think Brienne is Dunk's parallel. She is the modern Dunk. She chooses to be a knight. I mean, she goes to a tourney, big leagues, defeats everyone, and then joins Renly's Rainbow Guard. Your Grace, Brienne answered, I ask the honor of a place among your Rainbow Guard. I will be one of your 7 and pledge my life to yours, to go where you go, ride at your side, and keep you safe from all hurt and harm. Dunk also chooses to be a knight. I mean, he could have just buried Sir Arlen and kind of nope out of there and not be a knight, but he does. He chooses to be a knight and uphold the knight's oath. While Dunk didn't technically win his tourney at Ashford, he still did end up swearing allegiance to a king of Westeros. I mean, Renly isn't one, but Brienne thinks he is, so we'll give it to her. Funnily enough, Brienne mimicked Dunk in that she pledged herself to a rebel, just like how Dunk did in The Sworn Sword. I think Dunk's story tells us about Brienne in the sense that Brienne is already following Dunk's footsteps of being a hedge knight. Post Renly's demise, she pledges herself to Catelyn, which mimics what Dunk does, where he goes from one lord to the other, hedge knight life. I think Brienne will mimic being a hedge knight. Like Dunk, no matter what lord he pledges allegiance to, he's a ride or die, and Brienne is a ride or die. Just like Dunk, I think her journey is about how she affects people around her. Brienne has started to do this in our current story with Jaime. Now, if we compare Jaime to Dunk and Brienne, we can definitely see some differences. Unlike Dunk and Brienne, Jaime doesn't choose to be part of the Kingsguard. He's kind of asked and bullied into it. He can fulfill some of the Knight's Oath, but not all of it. He's famous for saying the whole thing about there being too many vows. How can you still count yourself a knight when you have forsaken every vow you ever swore? Jaime reached for the flagon to refill his cup. So many vows. They make you swear and swear. Defend the king, obey the king, keep his secrets, do his bidding, your life for his, but obey your father, love your sister, protect the innocent, defend the weak, respect the goods, obey the laws. It's too much. No matter what you do, you're forsaking one vow for the other. Like a knight, he did protect the innocent by slaying King Aerys so he wouldn't blow up the whole city, but then again, you killed your king, so there's a lot to be said there. Brienne's effect on Jaime is very similar to Dunk's effect on Egg. The more time they spend together, the more time they soften up to them. Dunk and Brienne follow the hero archetype. They are true knights. We can predict how and what they will do in every situation, but Egg and Jaime, we can't do that. They're more neutral. But I think with Brienne's presence, Jaime is going to become more good. Remember, his story is about redemption. So unlike Brienne's, where her story is about bringing the best out in people and showing people an ideal, just like how Dunk did, Jaime is about figuring that out for himself. He sees an example and he's going to start to emulate it. And I think that's going to have big moves in the story, which I'm attributing to Dunk, right? Because Brienne is like Dunk, and Dunk affects Egg, and Brienne's going to affect Jaime that way. So these are big in-universe changes that can happen. I think Jaime's allegiance is going to break off from Cersei, and that's going to tip the scales of power in universe. So that's just one effect of the Dunk effect. That's just one night we're comparing to Dunk, and their story is definitely following the same trajectory. How is this important beyond just A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, I think it told us that how a character is crafted is imperative to how the story will be. I know it was a little pedantic to go through all these things, but it's really important. Authors, especially George, aren't just using a character generator. Each of them play a role and purpose in the story. And I think having a two-dimensional flat static character like Dunk is important in that they let other characters shine. I know George has a ton of morally great characters because that's what makes a story realistic. People aren't just an archetype. We're not just 100% good or 100% bad. We have these internal conflicts. But what is interesting is including these archetypal characters. So this doesn't make these characters less important, less interesting. In fact, they're necessary for our story. All this to say is I was able to look at Dunk through this different lens of him having importance beyond just, hey, he helps Egg out in these situations. He's a lot more important than I thought he would be. And I thought because he doesn't change throughout the story, he's boring. But that is interesting as well because we have this huge cast of characters that are constantly changing. And just like Forster said, the characters that are the easiest to remember are these steadfast characters, these flat characters. And so when I think on A Song of Ice and Fire characters, yes, of course I think about my favorite girl, Daenerys. But now I'm looking back on Dunk and I'm seeing how he shines in his own story because his story is special. It's not just the typical redemption story, which I'm not saying redemption stories aren't interesting. They are. I love them. But I'm saying Dunk's story is so unique because we get to see what an archetype character happens in real time. It's not just this one of the 7 gods that they're praying to. This is a living and breathing example of truly a good character, which is so rare in the world. So for a realistic world like A Song of Ice and Fire, it's kind of refreshing to have a character like that. I know everyone loves Dunk by default because he's endearing, I know. And I didn't want to just like him because of that. I wanted to see him behind all that. Other reasons. Look, I'm losing my train of thought. Look, Dunk is Dunk and I'm here for it and I stan him and I think the show's going to be very interesting. A part of me doesn't want the actor to change how Dunk is as a character, but I will keep an open mind, I promise. Are there any other knights that have been changed by the Dunk effect? So let me know what you think in the comments. Please like the video and subscribe, and I will see you next time.